Welcome back to another episode of the North Star Takes podcast. I'm Bailey Paulicki. He's Jacob Liberta. We're a Minnesota sports podcast. So if you're a Minnesota sports fan, NFL fan, sports fan in general, please hit that subscribe button. And today we're going to be talking Minnesota Vikings. Obviously, all sorts of rumors swirling around about the GM search, the head coach search. We've had some crazy rumors involving some crazy people, especially on the coaching front. Let's kind of just jump right into it. We'll kind of start with the GM list because that's a little more solidified. We've seen it from various reporters, but I've got Ben Gessling, Star Tribune reporters list here. So the Vikings have 8 candidates so far that they've requested to interview for their open GM spot. We don't have to get into all the names, but there's a couple of people from the Browns, a couple of people from the Eagles. You got Titans executive, Chiefs executive, Buccaneers executive, Patriots executive. So, I mean, we can get into the names a little bit, but I mean, is there anyone that's truly sticking out to you so far? I mean, we're not going to pretend like we know who any of these people really are, but just the organizations they're coming from, maybe the role they had in those organizations, maybe their age, or, does any of that intrigue you whatsoever?
Yeah, those are all good questions to ask. I think those are definitely things the Wilfs better be considering in this search. And I think you get a little bit of diversity here with all these candidates. I mean,
Yeah.
I think there's a wide range of backgrounds and experience, which is great. I think then you're really going down every avenue and finding what's best for you and what fits best with this organization. So I think those are all great questions to ask. I guess I'm not too particular on the age. I mean, obviously the younger you get, probably the more likely you are to lean into the analytics, which I'm a big fan of that. But I don't know if the Wilfs feel that way too. But
Right.
I think that's something to consider. I think it's also something to consider, like you said, the organization they're coming from. Like, is this a successful team? Obviously, that shouldn't be the end all be all, because obviously you can get a guy from great winning organization, like let's say the Patriots or something, but it's like, well, Bill Belichick really runs the show. So is this guy just some yes man for Bill Belichick? And it's like, oh, then that's not worth it. But you got to think about that. And I think another thing I would personally like, I don't know about everybody else's feelings towards it, but I think great teams, Super Bowl teams, are built on obviously a solid foundation. I think that starts with drafted players. So personally, I would like a guy that's heavily invested in scouting the college game, and or a guy or a woman, doesn't matter. Sorry, excuse me. Anyways, anybody out there that can evaluate, anybody who can identify great college players that can make your team good for the next 10 years and contribute to your team for the long term, because I think that's really how teams are built. And I think that would go a long way towards building a true Super Bowl contender. So anybody who's got a lot of experience with scouting and knows what they're talking about, I think that's probably where I'd want to start.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. And I'll start off by saying I think it's great that they're going to be interviewing a woman for this role.
Yes, exactly. Me too.
Like you said, just go down every avenue you can, different experiences, different paths of how they got to this point. Like I think that's fantastic. And whether or not she's the hire, I mean, that remains to be seen. But I think it's great that there's at least that possibility for this team, and it could start a trend in that direction possibly. So that's always good to see. But yeah, there's intriguing, like to me, there's just intriguing front offices. Like I think the Browns have done a really good job of developing talent. Baker Mayfield's not the greatest quarterback, but outside of that, they've built a great offensive line. They have a solid defense. They got a couple intriguing skill players as well. They've done a pretty good job overall. Clearly that team's been able to kind of turn it around. John Spytek from the Buccaneers, like that's a very intriguing name to me, just because obviously the Buccaneers are great and Tom Brady's a huge part of that, but they've also been able to draft and develop and really build a good roster around Tom Brady. And like you mentioned before, Brady was kind of ready to he was kind of looking around the landscape and he saw the Buccaneers were ready to pop. And so I think that says a lot right there, that they had that roster in a position where a Tom Brady could step in and really take it to the next level. So a guy from the Patriots scares me a little bit, just because I think that organization is just so much run by Bill Belichick, and it's all centered around him, that I don't trust any coaches coming from there. I mean, maybe Brian Flores, but at the same time, I don't really know.
I heard some recent comments lately about his exit from Miami and what kind of went down to leading to his firing. So that kind of sets me back a little bit from that. But I mean, still, I think it's worth talking to him at least.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's worth it to give him an interview. He's got the head coaching experience, but clearly there was some stuff off there. And so it'd be nice to figure out what that is. But really, like, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know anything about these GM candidates, but I trust that the Wolves are going to be able to pick the right one. And it would be nice to see him lean more into analytics, just because not necessarily Spielman was against it, but Zimmer was very much against it. And so if you have a GM that's leaning more into that as well, then they probably are going to pick a head coach that wants to lean into that more. So I think there's definitely a lot of promising options, and I'm just hopeful that they're able to, hire one within the next week or so. I know they're not going to rush it, and obviously, basically everybody is saying that this is the most attractive job, both GM and head coach, that's out there. So I'm fine with the Vikings taking their time if these reports are true that GM candidates and head coaching candidates are willing to wait patiently to see if they can get this job.
I like that. I love that the Vikings might honestly control this offseason as far as all these hirings go, because once one domino falls, the rest do. And I think that kind of starts with our GM, because once you hire a GM, then you really get into full steam ahead, hiring a head coach and basically naming a face of your franchise with that. And I think that goes a long way towards planning for what you want to do for the future. And that begins with everything coming up very quickly after the playoffs end here in a month, when you're thinking about the NFL scouting combine to free agency to the draft. I mean, there's a lot there that you have to take in and plan for and prepare for. So I think there's the quicker you can do it, the better, but obviously you don't want to rush into it. So you make the wrong hire. And then, because I mean, if you get this wrong, that could set the organization back quite a ways. So obviously we don't want that, but obviously the sooner the better. But then I think you're kind of right when you hear all these rumblings about the GMs or potential GMs and coaches looking for jobs this offseason. It sounds like the Vikings are the hot commodity, and I think that's great, because then once we hire people, then everybody else kind of know where they're at with hiring their own coaches and front office personnel. So I'm pretty excited about that we have this stability here, and the structure, roster, everything, whole package that people would want to come here.
Yeah, and that's a testament really to the owners on down to Spielman and Zimmer for just stabilizing this thing, building competitive rosters for the most part, and just making it an attractive place to work. Because really, I really just think the Vikings need a reset or a refresh, however you want to call it. But it's not like this team's going to blow it all up and go in the tank. It's not going to happen like that. So it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, like I mentioned earlier, we've seen some just wild head coaching rumors, like this whole Lane Kiffin saga that's going on.
I'm here for it.
It's very interesting to say the least. The Wolves potentially met up with him. I don't get how there'd be a connection there, but it's beyond me. But you go for it.
Yeah, I know. This Lane Kiffin thing is interesting. Do you think Lane Kiffin could have been a deciding factor in them firing or keeping on Rick Spielman? Because
I think it's realistic.
Obviously, I think it was I think it was out there that Rick appeared to be in the long-term plan still as of the week before the last game of the season, and making plans for who the next head coach is going to be. Then all of a sudden the switch kind of flipped, and all of a sudden you get to Monday morning and he doesn't even know it, and he's fired, and along with him. So that's kind of wild. So obviously that was a pretty sudden thing. So you kind of wonder if Lane was one of the last people the Wolves talked to, if this conversation took place, if Lane kind of pushed him over the edge, being like, yeah, Rick's not the guy if you want to actually win a Super Bowl. So that's very juicy.
It is. And like I said, I don't know what the connection there would be.
I have no idea either.
I don't know how the Wolves would know Lane Kiffin or want to talk to him. I find it very hard to believe that he'd be like their top head coaching candidate. I think it's more realistic that he's a sounding board for, maybe he's got good connections with NFL coaches. I don't know, but maybe he knows what younger coaches want, and that could be part of the thing too. And he, like you said, maybe he just said Spielman's not it. He's too controlling. Obviously, him and Zimmer were at odds, so that it makes it interesting to think about for sure. But there's been rumors, of course, that Kellen Moore is potentially interested in this job. He's he thinks it's an intriguing job. Byron Leftwich, apparently. Doug Peterson is going to be interviewed by this team at some point, it's been reported. So, I mean, all the names we've kind of talked about before, they at least seem to have interest in the Vikings, which you can't blame them. But like we said, I think this is it's the hot commodity on the NFL market right now, which is amazing to think about. And it still blows my mind that Rick Spielman's gone. I know. Zimmer being gone, okay, we knew it was coming, but the Spielman thing is just, it's going to be so weird to see a new GM in here. And the team's just going to have a totally different philosophy. So, speaking of that philosophy, I mean, what are you really looking for going forward between both the coach and the general manager? And you can even throw in who you want your head coach to be if you want.
All right. Yeah, I might have to think about that for a little bit longer. Maybe I'll throw in an update at this point in time. So obviously, I think that could rapidly change depending on how these playoffs even play out. I don't know if I could be affected by that, but
Yeah,
because I mean, you have assistants that are coaching right now that if they put on a good performance, like let's say the Bucks go out there and just roll over everybody back to the Super Bowl again, and looks like the play calling is genius, then that's probably going to give Byron Leftwich a significant leg up just because he's doing that in the biggest moments possible.
yeah,
That's exactly what you want. So it could change. But anyways, I'll get to that. As far as the GM search goes and what I want in a GM is really somebody who's forward thinking. And I think most of all, I want somebody who's very invested and focused on the quarterback position because
yeah,
I think that makes or breaks a team. I don't think many Super Bowls are won by quarterbacks that aren't really elite in the league, aren't top 5, top 10, or on a cheap contract. And realistically, you get all those classic names everybody likes to throw out there when they want to play the devil's advocate and be like, oh, the
right,
Trent Dilfers and Brad Johnsons and Joe Flacco's and crap. But it's
right,
like, okay, so they won those 3 Super Bowls or whatever. Who's won the other like 17 since 2000? It's like all these elite quarterbacks. The Tom
yep,
Brady's obviously. Aaron Rodgers got one. Peyton Manning's got a couple. Russell Wilson's got one. Patrick Mahomes. I mean, you go on and on and on. You got all these quarterbacks. It's like you have to have a top tier quarterback. And I think you're going to only be able to do that to draft unless for some other reasons you could acquire like an Aaron Rodgers at the end of his career or something like that. But
right,
otherwise, if you have a really good quarterback, you're going to lock him up. So I think you have to be able to be somebody who can identify a quarterback in the draft and start building around them, and that's how you build a Super Bowl contender. So I think that's probably my number one thing I'd look for in a GM is somebody who's forward thinking, good with building relationships around the league, really, and then most of all, just identifying and drafting the right quarterback to build our franchise around.
yeah. And I agree with you 100%. I think you need a forward thinking, willing to lean into analytics, and
Mhm.
maybe even more, favoring the offensive side of the ball,
Yeah.
and really being in lockstep with the head coach in terms of how are
Yep.
we going to evaluate a quarterback, what do we want in a quarterback, etc. How do we want to build this offense around a quarterback? Maybe rather than, as much as I love Dalvin Cook, maybe
Mhm.
rather than drafting a running back, in the upper rounds, maybe you just keep focusing on building up that offensive line, and you can plug and play running back, making sure you have an influx of receivers still, just making sure that the quarterback's, in the best situation possible, I think is the big thing. Relationship building obviously is huge. And I think just having people skills is huge as well. Like,
Yes.
just being able to communicate with other people in the league. I know there's been some stuff talked about Rick Spielman and how he's like cut guys in certain scenarios, and
Yeah.
there's been some stuff thrown out there about that. But I mean, you see that with most teams in the league. But um, yeah, I think it's hard to go wrong here, honestly. And like you said, as long as they can draft, really, that's the main thing is you got to be able to draft and develop. And I think as long as the GM and head coach are in the same, you know, mindset there, I think the Vikings have people in their organization that are good scouting. Um, and they got player personnel guys that are sticking around, it sounds like. So I think from that standpoint, the draft will be fine. It's just the head coach and GM need to be on the same page.
Yes, totally agree. I think that synergy there is exactly what you need to have a successful organization, and goes from the GM and the head coach to the quarterback. I think that's a very important string of connections there, and obviously wasn't there with Rick and Zim and Kirk, so that's
Yeah.
why two of the three or two of them got fired, and one hopefully, in my opinion, will get traded this offseason. So we can just start fresh and build something new with some new energy and hopefully better relationships. So, and to that end, I did not say what coach I want at this point. I think I'm leading the way for me is Byron Leftwich,
Okay.
but I think after hearing all this Lane Kiffin steam, I'm intrigued. I know this feels kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It feels like a disaster waiting to happen, like huge. It could be total flop. But at the same time, I think he'd be a highly entertaining product. The guy and everything, all the energy he'd bring to the org, I would be here for it. But at the same time, it's like I don't know if he's really a Super Bowl winning coach material. But I guess who am I to say who is and who isn't? So I'd probably go Byron Leftwich first. But Lane Kiffin's kind of lurking there.
Yeah, I don't know if you'll be able to talk me into the Lane Kiffin thing, just because, I mean, he's bounced around for so many different jobs in college.
Yeah,
he had a cup of coffee in the NFL at one point too. Yep. There's no doubt I think he's a good offensive mind. Like, clearly that Ole Miss offense was extremely fun to watch, and it's an interesting angle that if they did hire him, you'd almost think that he'd pursue Matt Corral like very aggressively in the draft, which would be kind of exciting because I think he's a good quarterback. But I don't know if you'll be able to talk me into him. Leftwich is definitely my number one, just because all the things you hear about him, his leadership. Bruce Arians basically said it's BS that he hasn't had a head coaching offer yet, which is kind of amazing considering he hasn't really been in the spotlight for that long as the Bucs offensive coordinator. And I don't know. I'm encouraged by that. That Bucs offense is obviously very good, and he's the one calling the plays. So I think that's encouraging. I think Doug Peterson still intrigues me.
But I don't. Super Bowl with Nick Foles.
For me, it's like it's Leftwich at 1, and then from there, it's like there's a little narrow bin of like Bieniemy, Kellen Moore, Doug Peterson. Like they're all kind of in that same spot for me. I don't have like a definitive second choice honestly outside of Byron Leftwich.
I think that's fair. I think Leftwich is the guy. I think he's got the whole package that we'd really enjoy, and I think he'd also be as opposed to Lane, he'd be a pretty stable hire. So I think I would definitely appreciate that and keep the organization growing in the right direction. But honestly, who doesn't want to Lane Kiffin out there calling out other coaches and doing all these things? Like obviously he got burned by that comment he said before the Alabama game started when he goes up to the reporter. They ask him questions. He's like, "Get your popcorn ready." Just drops the mic and runs away. Like I want that on my team. I need that energy. Like that'd be a complete opposite of Zim. So I think I really appreciate that. Who doesn't love a coach that's like very active on Twitter too?
Yeah, it's almost like it's similar to PJ Fleck almost, and we've kind of talked about how we don't know if the PJ Fleck thing would work in the NFL.
Yeah,
I don't know if players would really be able to take him seriously. Like
that's the thing. I think if you can get, I think that'd be my biggest drawback is I don't know if you could really convince an NFL locker room of embracing this guy. But if he can actually like win over this Vikings team and he has like a good aura about him as far as like behind closed doors and things like that. Yep. I think he's a great offensive mind. So like on paper and theoretically, it sounds like it would work. But I mean, you never know. And at one point he was, until McVay got hired by the Rams back in 2017. Like Lane Kiffin was the youngest ever head coach in NFL history. So I think that has to count for something, that he obviously evolved pretty quick, and there was a reason he got hired in the first place. So I don't know. I think there's definitely potential there, but as far as the seriousness of him being a candidate, I don't know if it's really there. I'm not sure if the Wilfs and him even had a conversation for it. I think so, but like nobody knows for sure.
Right. It's peak rumor time, and that's the thing is we could have a GM next week, but we might not have a coach until basically the playoffs are done. So
yes.
That's what it's gonna kind of drag out, and there might even be crazier rumors by the time that happens. So
I'm here for it. I think it's a ton of fun. Obviously, as long as we get the guy right in the end, I don't care. But this doesn't happen for the Vikings very often. Obviously, the last time we did this was 8 years ago. So I think I'm gonna enjoy it while it lasts. Watch all these rumors swirl. I think it's gonna be a ton of fun.
I agree. Like this is the most excitement I've felt about the Vikings in at least two seasons since we made the playoffs.
Yeah, I'd say ever since that Saints win that wildcard weekend 2 years ago. Yeah, I can't disagree.
Yeah, so it'll be something, man. But like you said, I'm super excited, and one thing will lead into the next. We'll get a GM, then we'll get a head coach, and then free agency is going to happen, and there might be trades, and then the draft is coming. Like it's going to be never ending, basically all the way up until after the draft. So it's going to be a ton of fun.
I know, right? And I want you all to drop names in the comments here, who you want as a GM and who you want as a head coach right now. Obviously, that can be very fluid and can definitely change as these days go by. But I'm really curious to see who everybody wants right now.
Yes, give us your preference on both GM, head coach. You can give us lists if you want.
Yeah.
We want to see all of it because it's fun because everyone's got different ideas of what's best for the team, and I think that's what makes it fun because there's so many different ways to look at it.
I know, it's amazing. I think I hear a bunch of people liking Bieniemy because the background with the Vikings, and then being the guy that obviously people have been talking about the last couple of years, wondering why he hasn't had a head coaching job. And then you got Byron Leftwich with the top passing offense and Tom Brady and Tampa Bay the last couple of years, and the comments Bruce Arians made, like you said. And then you got Kellen Moore, hot name in Dallas, obviously. So and then you got even obviously the Lane Kiffin rumors to Doug Peterson, a guy who's been sitting out of football for a year. I mean, I could entertain any name out there and be intrigued.
And that's not even mentioning like Brian Flores got fired.
Oh, yeah.
He was a decent head coach for the Miami Dolphins for 3 years. Like,
exactly.
Not to mention, like, we won't hire a guy like Dan Quinn or Leslie Frazier or Todd Bowles, but those are all candidates too, and they've all been head coaches in the league before too. So
sure,
it's gonna be a crazy offseason, that's for sure. But
I know, I can't wait.
More to look forward to. So that'll do it for this edition of the North Star Takes podcast. Like we just said, please leave your comments below who you think who you prefer to be, or who you think will be the next GM and head coach. Please hit the like button on this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and give us a follow on both Twitter and Instagram. So thanks for watching.